off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Barbara Colby. It was July 24th, 1975, and Barbara Colby, a talented American actor, and her colleague James Kiernan had just wrapped up an acting class in Venice, California. As they strolled towards their car in a dimly lit parking area, an unimaginable tragedy unfolded. Out of nowhere, shots rang out, shattering the peaceful evening. Barbara Colby's life was instantly extinguished, leaving a void in the entertainment world. James Kiernan, miraculously clinging to life, summoned the strength to share vital information with the authorities. He described the assailants, though he couldn't place a name to their faces. The chilling reality dawned upon everyone that the attack had occurred without warning, motivation, or any discernible cause. Puzzled investigators meticulously analyzed the scene, hoping to uncover a motive or a potential robbery gone awry. However, they found no evidence of an attempted theft, leading them to a startling conclusion. This was a random act of violence, a merciless drive-by shooting. As the days turned into months and years, the elusive killers managed to evade justice, their identities shrouded in darkness. Decades have passed since that fateful night, yet the case remains hauntingly unsolved. The memory of Barbara Colby, as well as many unanswered questions, remain. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Pair of Anguish. I don't really like regular pairs all that much, but this one definitely sounds like the worst pair probably ever. Like even worse than the one that's got brown spots all over it. The Pair of Anguish was also known as the choke pair or mouth pair, and I wish we could just stop here and I could let you use your own weird imagination, but we'll keep moseying on through. This machine consisted of a metal body that was obviously shaped like a pear normally, but it was divided into different segments, and these segments could be spread apart by the simple turning of a screw. So basically this pear would be put into any kind of orifice, like the mouth, and then it would be slowly expanded, and you see where this is going. Do I need to continue? Alright, we're done number 9. Let's keep rolling along. I'm uncomfortable already.
Next up at number 8, the Iceman. You know how there are people out there who like to do a morning cold plunge? Well, one man, Wim Hof, nicknamed the Iceman, seems to have taken that to a whole new level. Born in the Netherlands in 1959, Hof is, as it seems, immune to freezing temperatures. At the age of 17, Hof said he had a sudden impulse to strip down and jump into a half-frozen canal, and it's not that he felt nothing, but he was able to withstand it for far longer than should have made any sense. This turned him into developing what he calls the Wim Hof method, which he says combines frequent exposure to cold paired with special breathing techniques along with yoga and meditation. In fact, Hof set the Guinness World Record for prolonged full body contact with ice and for swimming under ice in 2000. Then in 2012, curious about if it really was all some breathing technique or if he was some kind of medical marvel, researchers in the Netherlands examined samples of Hof's blood and determined that he was somehow able to manipulate his immune system at will, essentially stopping his body from going into a stress response due to the temperature. Now, sure, does his deep breathing help regulate the body? Of course, but Hof would have you believe it's all in the technique. However, there have been several tragic deaths from people attempting his method and subsequently freezing themselves to death, so maybe there is a little more to the story.
Number 7. Joe Pitler disappearance. In the late 90s and early 2000s, child and teen actor Joe Pitler appeared in a series of small and supporting roles in a number of movies and TV shows, most notably as Brennan Newton in the Beethoven family film franchise. According to the Charlie Project, Joe spoke with a friend at about 4 a.m. on January 5th, 2006 in his northeastern Washington hometown of Bremerton. A few weeks before his 19th birthday, he left his apartment untouched, unlocked, and with the lights on, and apparently took only his wallet and car keys before he disappeared without telling anyone where he might be going, apart from some poems that spoke to his depressing mindset. 4 days later, Joe's Toyota Corolla was located in Bremerton, and authorities suspected that Joe may have jumped to his death off a bridge over Port Madison Narrows, but no evidence of that nor his remains were ever recovered.
At number 6, we have Craney Landis. Landis was a graduate student at Minnesota University back in 1924. He asked his other graduate students to assist him in conducting an experiment in understanding if we humans all react similarly in different emotions. So, he painted specific lines on each individual's face and then got them to react to certain stimuli. At first, the experiment was harmless. He would record each of their faces as they listened to music, smell ammonia, read passages from the Bible, tell a lie, little things like that. But seeing no real results, he decided to up the ante. He then showed them images, then some horrendous photos of skin conditions, firing random gunshots to frighten his test subjects, getting them to stick their hand in a pail of slimy live frogs that had a live wire in the bottom, so when they touched the live wire they would get an electric shock. Finally, the worst one of them all, decapitating a rat. He finally put a live rat in one hand and a knife in the other hand, and the test subject was then demanded to cut off the animal's head. If they refused, then he would do it in front of them. Sounds pretty scarring, if I do say so myself. Some started crying, others laughed in disbelief, and others got angry and swore at him. 2/3 ended up carrying out the dark death sentence, and the worst part of it all was that Landis even used a 13-year-old boy, who was actually a patient at the university. His findings in the end proved nothing and were quite different patient to patient. In the end, he just seemed like an evil madman scientist.
Number 5, Marcel P. As if the war crimes of World War II weren't bad enough, Marcel P. had to add his villainy to the list. Marcel's life started out pretty rough, and due to his addiction to thievery was committed to an asylum. But instead of going to the asylum, he ended up earning his medical degree while interning. Sadly, he didn't use his intellect for good. Instead, he made an already horrific time even worse. Many Jewish people were trying to escape Europe for obvious reasons, and Marcel made sure many did not. He would tell his victims that he had a way out, a route to escape occupied France beneath the eyes of the German army. He claimed he was a part of the French resistance, gathering trust from many desperate souls, but when they fell prey to his plan, he would inject them quickly with cyanide and steal all of their valuables. Luckily, he was eventually captured and at the end of the war in 1946, but by then the damage had been done.
In our third spot today we have the shadow people. It's said that the shadow people are one of the scariest types of paranormal activity. Unlike a real shadow, shadow people are much darker, and typically they can only be seen in your peripheral vision. I bet it's happened to you. You're sitting on your couch, minding your own business, when all of a sudden you swear you see something just run by the corner of your eye. You look, and nothing's there. You just saw a shadow person, and they are said to be hella evil. Let's take a trip to 1998 and hear the story shared by a man named Michael W. One night he woke up in the middle of the night and felt thirsty, so he went to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when he got a feeling that someone was there watching him. He then said, and I quote, "There at the top of the basement stairs and in front of the light switch, I could distinctly make out the figure of what I automatically assumed was my good friend Larry. He called out to him being like, 'Larry, what are you doing, man?' But the figure didn't respond. That's when he knew it wasn't Larry. All of a sudden the shadow lunged at him. Michael grabbed a knife and jabbed it towards him, but the entity went right through his body and continued on past him. He turned on the light and it disappeared. Michael was horrified by this experience. What's even creepier is that his house address ends in 666. He literally bought a haunted house. Nice one. Moving on to number 2, we have the car dog sack. Now, I can't believe that someone genuinely thought that this next invention was a good idea. Basically, back in the 1930s, someone was like, who wants to ride with their dog in the car with them? No, let's put them on the outside of the car. Someone invented a dog sack that hooks onto the dog and then onto the outside of a car. Then you literally just drive along with your dog just outside of the car, flapping in the wind. Hello, this is wrong for a number of reasons. One, that is super unsafe for your poor little dog. Imagine taking a sharp turn and then the dog just is swinging side to side. Number 2, what if you get into a car crash? Sorry, but doggy would be the first to go. Also, I know that dogs like sticking their head out of the window when in cars, but this is way different and just straight up dangerous.
Coming in at number 10 is Russell and Shirley Derman, Georgia. In May 2014, elderly couple Russell and Shirley Derman were expected to attend a party for the 2014 Kentucky Derby with their neighbors, who grew concerned when the couple did not show up. On May 6th, when the neighbors went into their house to check on them, the neighbor found the door unlocked and entered the house. Russell's decapitated body was found on the floor of his 2-car garage, lying in a small pool of blood. When police were unable to locate Shirley inside the house, they initially suspected that she had been kidnapped. 10 days later, Shirley's body was found by a fisherman on Lake Oceanee. An autopsy found that she died from either 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object. Now, Russell's head has never been found, and the case remains unsolved to this day.
At number 7, we have Gore Orphanage. Light of Hope Orphanage was established in 1902. It was run by a religious zealot. One day the building caught fire, and the young ones inside all perished in the flames, the cries for help being unheard. The question was, how did the fire start? Well, some say it was an accident, maybe one of the orphans dropped a lamp, but then there's the legend of Old Man Gore, the cruel, sadistic man who ran the facility. In reality, the man's name was Johan Sprunger. He ran the orphanage with his wife, Katarina. It was actually a former orphanage they ran that caught on fire. It was true that they were cruel though. Orphans attempted escaping from the institution on a number of occasions. There was also a fire in an elementary school in the nearby town of Collinwood where 176 young people died. So most likely these two real-life incidents were combined and kind of formed this urban legend that is Gore Orphanage.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Bob Crane. On June 29th, 1978, the world was stunned when Bob Crane, a beloved actor renowned for his portrayal of Colonel Hogan in the TV series Hogan's Heroes, was tragically discovered bludgeoned to death in his apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. The gruesome nature of his killing sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and beyond. A suspect was eventually brought to trial, yet the outcome proved inconclusive. Despite the legal proceedings, the case remains unsolved, leaving a cloud of uncertainty hanging over the circumstances of Crane's killing and the identity of his killer. The enigma surrounding this high-profile crime has fueled intense debates and ongoing investigations. Numerous theories have emerged over the years, speculating on potential motives and potential culprits. Some believe that the motive was rooted in personal conflicts, while others suspect a connection to Crane's private life, given his involvement in a highly publicized and controversial scandal. Yet the truth remains elusive, and the killing of Bob Crane remains a haunting mystery. In our number 5 spot today, we have necklacing. Suddenly I have a desire to never wear jewelry again after learning about this one. Necklacing is a terrifying practice that involves a rubber tire and, unfortunately, a human being, obviously. The rubber tire is filled with petrol, which is then put around the victim's chest and arms and then set ablaze. Yeah, what the heck? I feel like I'm describing a terrible, scary mob sort of a movie right now, but sadly I'm just talking about things people have actually done to each other in real life. I mean, I'm sure you can figure out what happens next, but it is said that this method can take up to 20 minutes for someone to pass away from, and they're just left suffering in the meantime. How horrible. Just like everything else on this list, and it only gets worse. Maybe? I don't know about worse, but it definitely doesn't get better.
Next up at number 4, Syndrome X. When Brooke Greenberg was born in 1993, she weighed a mere 4 pounds and had a hip dislocation. Luckily, the hip issue was fixed through a surgery, and although 4 pounds is generally revered as small for a newborn, she was premature and nothing else seemed off, so from what doctors could see, she appeared to be perfectly healthy. However, things started becoming mysterious around the time she was 4 or 5 years old, as her parents and doctors noticed that Brooke appeared to have stopped growing. As the years went by, Brooke remained virtually unaged, a phenomenon that confused every single medical professional that her family seeked out. By the age of 20, she still looked the same as she had when she was 4 years old, measuring less than 3 feet tall and weighing only about 16 pounds. And it wasn't only her appearance that had stopped progressing. Brooke communicated as an infant would, giggling when happy, crying when sad, and continued to wear diapers. Interestingly, the only thing that continued to grow as normal were Brooke's hair and nails. The family took her to endless specialists over the years looking for answers to their daughter's condition, but each one was just as perplexed as the next. Some simply said not to worry and that she would catch up, while others prescribed growth hormones, but nothing ever seemed to help their daughter grow. Doctors were completely stumped by this poor girl's condition, calling it Syndrome X, and ever since her death at the age of 20 in 2013, specialists have yet to come up with an explanation.
Number 3. Princess Diana's death. Princess Diana was constantly hounded by paparazzi, which resulted in her death. On August 31st, 1997, Diana was fatally injured in a car crash at the Point de Lama tunnel in Paris. She left the Ritz in Paris at around 12:20 a.m. and her car went into the tunnel, where the driver lost control and crashed into a pillar. Diana was critically injured but died later that morning in the hospital. Now, because Diana was so loved and hated by the royals for being so loved, there's a conspiracy theory that the royals royal family planned for her to die. Now in the months immediately preceding her death, although she was attempting to live her life as normally as she could, even though she got divorced, Diana expressed fears that she would have her life ended, most likely by a staged car crash. The end came in a way similar to how she predicted it, but what we may never know is whether the crash was an accident, as subsequent investigations determined, or staged as she feared.
At number 2, we have Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb was the one who headed Project MKUltra and worked closely with West in our number 3 spot. Gottlieb was tasked with testing LSD in interrogation settings, but he didn't just test his work in interrogation settings or even in a lab. He actually brought his studies to the bar, where he would slip LSD into unsuspecting bar patrons' drinks. I don't think we need to question how unethical or wrong this one is, as it is clearly something that is messed up and sometimes still happens today, unfortunately. But this video is titled Evil Scientists in History Who Went Mad, and I think this is a pretty good proof that this guy was off his freaking rocker.
Number 2, Shiro Ishi. Talk about Dr. Evil. During World War II, Japanese prisoner of war camps were worse than hell could ever be on Earth. One of the reasons why was because of Dr. Shiro Ishi. He excelled in school and was even called a genius time and time and again. However, instead of using his mind for good, he became a monster. Shiro Ishi was the director of Unit 731 in the Department of Biological Weapons for the Imperial Japanese Army. Ishi dedicated most of his life to understanding the deadliest kinds of science, from disease warfare and inhumane experiments. He did it all to help Japan become the leader of the world. He would perform horrendous experiments on prisoners of war in their encampments, infecting them with diseases and testing out biological weapons on them. His unit even performed live vivisections on prisoners, inflicting them with hypothermia, frostbite, induced strokes, and heart attacks. He was never punished for his crimes, and ended up avoiding prosecution for his crimes by turning his experiments over to the US. That's how he got out of it. They were like, you know what? We won't punish you if you give us the results.
And in our number 1 spot, we have Joseph Mengele. This guy is considered one of the most evil scientists in history. Joseph was a member of the Party, and in 1943 he was sent to work at Auschwitz. That's where he took advantage of the prisoners and decided to run experiments on them. In particular, he targeted twins. He would amputate their limbs, inject typhus in one, and then give them both blood transfusions. As you can imagine, hundreds died due to his experiments, which in reality weren't experiments. In fact, he was called the Angel of Death by the prisoners because of the messed up ways he would kill people. To make matters worse, he even would collect the eyes of his victims. In 1945, he was arrested by the Americans for his crime, but he managed to escape until he died in Brazil.
Starting off this countdown, we had the SS Watertoown. Back in 1924, the SS Watertoown was traveling through the Pacific Ocean when 2 of its crew members sadly passed away. The men were James Courtney and Michael Meehan. They had been assigned to clean out a cargo tank, but while doing so, they sadly were overcome by gas fumes and died. Their bodies were tossed to sea. The next day, other crew members got quite the fright when they saw the heads of the 2 dead men on board the ship. Later, they saw their faces in the sea. This photo was taken of the phenomena. What you're looking at is the waves in the water, and you can clearly see the men's faces in it. Now, for those of you who think that this is fake, the captain took this photo and then the film was left intact and untouched until they reached the port in New Orleans. That's when the captain handed it over to officials of the city's services company. When the film was developed, everyone believed the crew because the photo is physical evidence of ghosts. Apparently the haunting did stop though when the crew was changed over, so maybe it's not the ship that was haunted by the men, but the crew. Moving on, at number 9 we have Allestra. Allestra is a fat substitute that apparently contains no calories, no cholesterol, and no fat. So sounds healthy, right? Wrong. So people were using it to make high-fat foods like potato chips to make it, healthier. Little did they know about the side effects. The big one being it prevents the absorption of certain vitamins and minerals. As a result, they would go undigested through the intestines and cause a number of digestive problems. Nowadays, a number of countries have banned this product, like Canada and some European countries, but it's still available in the States.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the Catholic persecution in Britain. In the 16th and 17th century in Britain, the ruling Protestants sure did not like anyone who practiced Catholicism. This time period in Britain was a period of upheaval in general, mostly because of religion. People at the time were arguing over which kind of Christianity was the best, and let me tell you, the Protestants definitely did not think it was Catholicism. This led to the Catholics rebelling and then the subsequent persecution. During this time, if you were even suspected of being Catholic or harboring one, you would be put to death in one of the many horrifying ways that they found to go about it. People would be quartered or hanged or crushed to death, even if there was no solid proof of what kind of Christianity they were practicing. This time period most definitely isn't a bright spot in the history of humans' time here on Earth.
Number 7. The Zodiac, California. The Zodiac took the lives of 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. Now, he coined this name in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers. Now, some of the letters included cryptograms or ciphers in which he claimed that he was collecting his victims as for the afterlife. Now, he targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. 2 of his wounded victims survived, and the Zodiac would attempt to end the lives of a couple on a hillside at Lake Berryessa, but only the woman would succumb to her injuries. The man would live to tell the story of what happened and give his creepy description of the hooded serial slayer. Now, the Zodiac claimed to have taken the lives of 37 victims and has been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or outside the state. While many theories regarding the identity of the Zodiac have been suggested, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher who died in 1992.
At number 5 is the West Mesa unalivings. 11 women, their remains discovered in 2009, buried beneath a dusty New Mexico desert. It's one of those American mysteries that might never be completely unraveled. Originally, people thought it was the work of a serial unaliver, but there's a twist here. Actually, a possible connection to a trafficking ring. An anonymous tip pointed fingers at a suspect from Central America, but it doesn't stop there. Cops even suspected a trafficking ring operating through Texas, preying on people of the night during big events across the Southwest. This complex web of darkness stretches across various states, leaving us with more questions than answers.
Next up, we have Satan's Hollow. In Cincinnati, there is a famous drainage tunnel, a tunnel with a very dark history. Strange and ominous things are said to have happened there. Satanic rituals and disappearances supposedly plague the tunnel, and one story goes that during one of these rituals, a portal to the underworld was accidentally opened. This has led to a number of locals believing this series of interconnected tunnels are actually a portal to hell itself now. People claim to hear strange noises coming from its depths and have even witnessed a shadowy figure known as the Shadow Man, a demonic entity who stalks the tunnel at night.
In our number 3 spot today, we have Dorothy Arnold. On December 12, 1910, Dorothy vanished under perplexing circumstances that continue to baffle investigators to this day. The last known sighting of Dorothy Arnold occurred as she strolled along the bustling 5th Avenue in New York City. Despite exhaustive searches, extensive media attention, and a relentless pursuit for answers, no trace of her has ever been uncovered. Her disappearance, full of mystery, has left behind a void of unanswered questions that echo through the decades. Numerous theories have emerged over time, ranging from theories of voluntary disappearance to more sinister possibilities. Was it an unfortunate accident? Did she choose to start a new life far from the spotlight of her affluent upbringing? Or did a darker fate befall her? At this point in time, what exactly happened is totally unclear, and the truth is, we might never know for sure. In our number 2 spot today, we have Drawn and Quartered. Alright, you guys asked for this one, and I am nothing if not a great listener, so here we go. This was a popular form of punishment and became the statutory penalty for men who were convicted of high treason in the Kingdom of England from 1352, although this form of punishment certainly existed well before that. Basically, whoever the convicted was, they would be secured to some sort of a wooden panel and then drawn by horse to wherever this thing was going down. That wasn't said casually to make light of this horrible punishment. I'm just uncomfy, so I'm trying to keep it cool and casual. So once at the place, the person would then be hanged, almost to the point of losing their life, but from there they would be emasculated, for lack of a better term, disemboweled, beheaded, and then quartered or chopped into 4 pieces. Alright, and because this simply wasn't enough for some insane reason, the pieces would then be displayed in prominent places across the country. Like, no, I don't want to see someone's upper right quadrant while I'm going for breakfast. I'll pass on that. Thank you so much though.
And last up today in our number 1 spot, no pain. Well, most of the time we try to avoid it since you know it hurts and it isn't fun. Knowing that you are in pain is actually really important because it helps you keep from getting more hurt. Like when you burn your arm on the 400-degree oven rack and it hurts like hell, so you immediately move your arm away. Or maybe you break your ankle and it obviously hurts, so you stop walking, thus hopefully stopping you from making it even worse. So with that in mind, imagine a life where nothing was telling you you were in pain. Well, that's exactly what Gabby Gingras has had to deal with her whole life. Now 23, Gabby has never felt a semblance of pain her whole life. As a little one, her parents said she would chew her hands until they looked like raw meat, but would never cry, and it was then that they knew something was not right. Then a few years later, Gabby scratched herself blind in one eye and had to wear goggles to sleep until she was old enough to understand her condition. As a kid, she routinely, unwittingly injured herself, once knocking out all of her teeth, another time getting second-degree burns from standing too close to a radiator, and even broke her own jaw but had no idea for several weeks. Even seemingly small things like weather conditions don't faze her. She has to be reminded to wear a coat in the winter so she doesn't get frostbite, or stand in the shade in the summer as she's completely unaware of how to gauge temperature. Her condition is called hereditary sensory autonomic neuropathy, or HSAN, and while there is no cure, and the cause of the condition remains a big question mark to medical professionals, with proper support and learning from an intellectual perspective what can be dangerous, most people can thankfully live a totally normal life.
Coming in at number 10 is Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister and activist, and one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movement from 1955. Now, he died on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, as he was assassinated. Claims soon arose over suspect aspects of King's assassination and the controversial role of the alleged assassin, James Earl Ray. Although his guilty plea eliminated the possibility of a trial before a jury, within days Ray had recanted and claimed his confession was forced. Suspicions were further raised by the confirmation of illegal surveillance of King by the FBI and the CIA, and the FBI's attempt to prompt King to end his own life. In 1979, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of King and that Ray was a scapegoat. In 1999, a mixed-race jury at a Memphis civil suit reached an anonymous verdict that King was assassinated as a result of a conspiracy involving the US government. After the verdict, Coretta King said, "There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." The jury found the mafia and various local, state, and federal government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination, and Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame.
At number 9 we have Wang Huk. Wang is famously known for his work creating human stem cell lines using cloned embryos from patients suffering from spinal cord injury. This major accomplishment promised an endless supply of stem cells genetically matched to patients, but it turned out to be all lies. Wang admitted in 2006 that he was indeed falsifying data, but still claiming that he had the ability to do what he was lying about all along. The court found Wang guilty of buying human eggs in violation of the country's bioethics laws and embezzling 830 million won, which is equivalent to $700,000 US of government money. He was sentenced to 2 years in a Korean prison. He received such a light sentence because the judge admired Wang's dedication to Korean biotechnology. Many other Korean scientists in the community are not ready to welcome him back though, after embezzling so much money on what is supposed to be a great and worthy cause. One Korean researcher states that it is truly tragic because he is clearly one talented experimentalist. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Pretty hard to just trust someone with government and public money after a stunt like that, but hey, I hope there's some scientific breakthrough soon.
Number 8, John Christie. John Christie had so much potential, with an IQ of 128, and he was incredibly gifted in mathematics. Who knows what good he could have done for the world, but during the 1940s to the 1950s, Christie stole the lives of 8 women including his wife, and how he did it is stomach churning. He preyed on the desperate lives of women seeking help and posed as a backstreet He would first knock them out with gas, but they would never wake up. When they passed out, he strangled them before or after doing other unmentionable things to them. He stashed the bodies underneath the floorboards, in the garden, or in the kitchen alcove. These horrors took place at 10 Rillington, Notting Hill, London, and the house has since been demolished. But one of the most awful things he did was frame the husband of a family who moved in above him. Christie killed his wife and their daughter, and then set the husband up as the killer. The man, Timothy Evans, was forced into giving a false confession and was hung, and it was this miscarriage of justice that led to the suspension of capital punishment.
Moving on, at number 7 we have Sergey Bubka. I'm so sorry, I know I already butchered his last name. Sergey was a Soviet scientist. He started off on the right track, kinda. He created a machine used to help perform the first Soviet open heart surgery, and then he spiraled into madness. He started to use this machine to try and do some messed up procedures, like take vital organs out of dogs. He killed hundreds of dogs with these operations. Basically, he would cut open the dogs, take out the organs, and hook them up to this machine to see if he could keep them alive outside of the body. His most famous and messed up experiment was called the dog's head, where he severed a dog's head and connected it to one of his machines, which then brought the head back to life, just the head. It even responded to being given a treat. It ate it, and then it fell right out because you understand. Of course, it died not too long after.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the disappearing objects. I know this has happened to you before. You place your keys down somewhere and when you go back to the spot, they're just not there. Honestly, it happens to me all the time. I just call my mom and somehow she just comes and finds it, like she has magic powers. Anyway, but it might not be your faulty memory to blame here. It could actually be a demon or ghost playing tricks on you. It's called the disappearing objects phenomenon. It's when an object disappears randomly only to reappear days later, maybe in the same spot, maybe in a completely different one. Paranormal researchers believe that entities do this by using water currents, electrical currents, or even your own energy. Moving on, at number 4 we have the flying car. It's a bird! It's a plane! No, it's a flying car! Ever wish you had a flying car like Ron and Harry in Harry Potter? Well, there was almost a time when this was gonna be a thing. So back in around the 1970s, a man named Henry Smolinski and his partner, Hal Blake, were trying to invent a flying car. They took the wings of an aircraft and configured it onto a car. As you can imagine, they had a quite difficult time with this. At first, they experienced a number of engine failures, and then there were problems with the plane's wings. On September 11th, 1973, Henry and Hal were taking their invention for a spin when the wings detached from the vehicle during a test flight. The car crashed down into a pickup truck and burst into flames. Both inventors lost their lives. So as cool as a flying car sounds, maybe let's not invent it, okay? Sure, it would free up road space, but like imagine getting into a car accident mid-air. It'd be super messy and dangerous.
In our number 3 spot today we have the Senkaku Period. This period, which lasted for over 100 years, is one of the most defining and influential eras of Japanese history. This time was marked by the consistent war and quickly shifting political climate, and there was an almost constant fight for territory. For those who lived during this period, the things that they would have to deal with would range from things like having your village or your home raided. Civilians would often be caught in the middle of battle that they had absolutely nothing to do with, and just a general lack of security. This wasn't the case for every single person who lived through this era, as of course the shifting climate definitely worked in the favor of some, but for those who found themselves caught in the middle of the areas that weren't thriving, this period is certainly one of the worst that was riddled with just a general disregard for human life.
Number 2. Brooklyn Farthing, Kentucky. On June 21st, 2013, Brooklyn Farthing, her younger sister Paige, and cousin went to a field party. Paige and Brooklyn's cousin decided to leave the party early on, while Brooklyn had been plans to sleep over at a friend's house who was also at the party, so she was going to stay. However, when Brooklyn's friend decided she wanted to spend the night at a boy's house, the two argued and the friend left. Now towards the end of the party, Brooklyn was seen leaving with 2 young men, and one of the men was dropped off, but the other man took Brooklyn to his house. night. It was at around 4 a.m. on June 22nd that Brooklyn called Paige and asked if their cousin could come pick her up. However, the cousin had had too many drinks and was in no condition to drive. Now, Brooklyn didn't want her mother to have to come get her, so she called her ex-boyfriend. He agreed to give her a ride home when he got off work. It was at this point that the man who brought Brooklyn to the house left. Now, before long, Brooklyn's ex-boyfriend received several texts from her saying, "Can you hurry, please hurry," and then "I'm scared." Then another text came in telling the ex to never mind and that Brooklyn was going to another party. He asked who she was going with, but there was no response and Brooklyn hasn't been heard from or seen since.
At number 1 is Charlie Chopoff. Now, if you think serial unalivings are the stuff of movies and TV shows, think again. Charlie Chopoff is an unidentified serial unaliver who terrorized the streets of Manhattan from 72 to 73. What makes this case even more unsettling was the gruesome nature of the crimes. See, Chopoff's signature move was you could probably guess or Google it. I wouldn't recommend it. Imagine the fear that gripped the city during those days. Despite a suspect, Erno Sato, confessing to one of the unalivings, he was deemed unfit for trial and sent back to a mental institution, leaving the case open and the mystery unsolved. The question remains, who was Charlie Chopoff? And will we ever uncover the truth behind these horrific crimes?
And we're gonna kick off the list with the legend of the Hookman. Now, supposedly on Pond Run Road in the village of New Richmond, there once lived a doctor and his wife. They had a son who was mentally disturbed, and these two were ashamed of him and opted to keep him out of the public eye. This meant chaining him up in the basement whenever people were over, or when they just didn't want him in their presence. One night, there was a terrible storm. A bolt of lightning hit their house and a fire started. When authorities arrived on the scene, they found the parents burnt to death, which was the perfect outcome for despicable people like that. But the boy who had been chained up in the basement at the time was nowhere to be found, aside from his hand, still chained up to the wall in the basement. So where did he go? Well, legends started to spread that over the years he grew up stalking through the woods, stealing from homes nearby, brandishing a hook for a hand, and brutalizing innocent people, especially young couples. The urban legend of the Hookman is one you see all over the place. This is just Ohio's specific version of the tale.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Brian Jones. Brian, a founding member of the iconic rock band The Rolling Stones, met a very mysterious and untimely demise. On July 3rd, 1969, Jones was found lifeless at the bottom of his swimming pool at his home in Sussex, England. The official cause of death was recorded as drowning due to misadventure, but suspicions and unanswered questions have persisted. Controversies surround the circumstances leading up to Jones' death. Some believe that his passing was a tragic accident, possibly caused by ingesting illicit substances or a combination of substances, impairing his judgment while swimming. However, conspiracy theories suggest foul play and the involvement of others. The true events leading to Brian Jones' demise remain elusive. The unresolved mystery surrounding his death has fueled ongoing speculation, with some calling for a reopening of the case to uncover the truth behind his tragic end. In our number 8 spot today, we have the water drip. This one, also referred to as the dripping machine, was a form of mental. I know some of these ones that are more psychological don't seem as bad as the horrible forms of physical punishment we've talked about, but that's not necessarily true. This punishment involved cold water, which would slowly be dripped onto a person's scalp, forehead, and face for a prolonged period of time. The pattern of the drops was irregular, and because the water was cold, it was obviously quite jarring, which would cause a person's anxiety to spike as they try and anticipate the next drip. Okay, if this one wasn't gruesome enough for you, let me add one more kind of water punishment in here for good measure. We also have the forced ingestion of water, which is, exactly that. Forcing someone to drink too much water that they eventually aspirate on it or die from water intoxication, which yes, is a real thing.
Coming in at number 7, a human chimera. Due to the nature of how lives are brought into this world, if there's one thing that is never up for debate, it's generally the biological mother of a person. However, one woman named Karen Keegan found herself in the most bizarre and baffling situation. In 2002, Karen was in need of a second kidney transplant after her first one failed, so she underwent genetic testing with her family to see if any of them would be a match and able to donate her. So imagine Karen and her doctor's surprise when the test suggested that genetically, while all her children were siblings, she was not the biological mother of 2 of the 3 children she brought into the world. Her doctor assumed this had to be a mistake, and so they tested once more. But strangely, the results were the same. As it turns out, Karen was a chimera, which is a person composed of 2 genetically distinct cellular lines. Essentially, it turns out that the DNA in her blood was different from the DNA in her ovaries, a phenomenon that her doctor hypothesized came from 2 eggs that were fertilized very early on and fused together when Karen was a fetus in her own mother. Okay, so maybe this one isn't a totally unsolved medical mystery, but you have to admit it's pretty wild.
Number 6. Brian Jones's death. Brian Jones was a musician, songwriter, and record producer. Around midnight on July 2nd, 1969, his body was discovered at the bottom of the swimming pool at his estate. He was pulled from the pool and had CPR performed on him, but was pronounced dead upon arriving at the hospital. Now, Brian's death came just 6 weeks after Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Charlie Watts informed him he was out of the band. Accounts of the night Brian died say that prior to him going for a swim, he had been drinking brandy and taking sleeping pills, and as a result was unsteady on his feet and his speech was garbled. An autopsy declared his death was due to drowning, later clarified as death by misadventure. His daughter, though, Barbara Marion, contends that her father may have had his life ended by someone on purpose and believes that his death was never properly investigated by the authorities. Rumors have alleged for years that Frank Thorogood, a builder who was working on Brian's house, who was the last person to see him alive, may have ended his life after a dispute over money.
Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have Johan Conrad Dipple. This scientist was born in Castle Frankenstein back in 1673, so it is only fitting that he was a mad and evil scientist. Dipple was a theologian, alchemist, and scientist who developed a popular dye called Prussian blue, and it's actually still used to this very day, which is very cool, but he is also known for the most controversial of things, such as mixing animal bones and hides together in a stew he named Dipple's Oil. Real original. He claimed that whoever drank this gross oil would then have an extended life, but he never said how long either, so I mean, whatever, dude. He loved dissecting animal bodies, and many believed he frequently dug up and stole human bodies and conducted weird experiments on them in his laboratory. Needless to say, this guy is one of the main inspirations for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but to the best of our knowledge, he never had the same luck as Dr. Frankenstein in the book. I'm guessing he tried to give that magical animal elixir to the corpses to see if he could bring them back to life, but sorry pal, no liquid on earth can do that. And oh, by the way, Miss Johnson would like her husband back, and her cat.
Number 4, Ed Kemp. Funnily enough, I think this is only the second time I've actually mentioned Ed Kemper in a video, which is very surprising because he's Ed Kemp. Ed's strange talent for making people believe he was a gentle giant, all while committing 10 of the most gruesome crimes astounds me. With an IQ of 145, he easily manipulated his victims into trusting him before it was the last thing they ever did. Standing at 6'9" and weighing 250 pounds, he used both brawn and brains to overpower the women he killed. He showed obvious signs of a pathological need to kill from a young age, starting with the family cat all the way to killing his paternal grandparents at age 15. Even then, he was able to convince mental health professionals to let him go early because he was fine. Wow. From 1972 to 1973, Ed used the line, "I don't have all day," to convince hitchhikers to enter his car, implying he was in a rush, put pressure on them, and convinced them that he didn't have time to kill them. They also never caught him. He turned himself in.
Moving on to number 3, we have Sigman Rascher. Sigman was a scientist/doctor. In 1939, Sigman asked his boss to send him human subjects for his experiments. He thought he had the cure for cancer and wanted humans to operate on instead of lab rats. That's when he got carried away with his power. He went from trying to cure cancer to his prisoners. In fact, he wanted to see how little oxygen was needed to survive. So he would place prisoners in chambers that suck all the air out and just watch them die. He also conducted hypothermia research on 300 prisoners. 1/3 of them died a gruesome death. To make matters worse, he also would collect human skin and make saddles out of them.
In our second spot, we have the bad smells. Next time you're sitting on your couch chilling and you get a whiff of rotten eggs, don't blame it on your dog tootin'. okay? It could be that a demon or ghost is present in your home. It's said that evil spirits or demons can be identified with bad smells, like sulfur or rotten eggs. If the smell comes out of nowhere, then leaves out of nowhere, either you let one rip or a demon was just in your presence. Other people have claimed to randomly get a whiff of perfume or wood smoke or cigars. This can also mean that a ghost is present. Maybe the ghost used to smoke a pipe when they were alive, or would always wear a signature perfume scent. I will say that most of the paranormal stories that I have read involves families moving into a new home that they don't know is actually haunted. Strange things will begin to happen, like doors will slam on their own, they'll hear eerie footsteps, and of course they will smell sulfur. All signs that the home is haunted. And in our number one spot today we have plastic bags. I mean, plastic in general is super bad for the environment, but today let's focus specifically on plastic bags, which are polluting our earth. So the plastic bag was invented in the 1960s and was credited to Swedish engineer Sten Gustaf Thulin. At first, it was great, you know, so convenient. You could grab this tiny little bag, you know, do a little shake it out, shove things in, and then just toss it when you're done. Little did they know how big of a problem it would become. For starters, in America alone, 100 billion plastic bags are used a year. That's just in America, one country. In order to make that many bags, it requires 12 million barrels of oil. Not only that, but less than 1 in 7 bags are actually properly recycled. Most of it are just thrown in the landfill. And it takes 1,000 years to degrade. And even then, they don't break down completely. Instead, they become microplastics that absorb toxins and continue to pollute the environment. There's literally no benefits to using them at this point. Lastly, birds often mistake shredded plastic bags with food. Same with sea turtles. They think that the bags are jellyfish in the ocean. And fish are starting to be found with plastic in their stomach. It's said that by 2050 there will be more plastic in the sea than fish. So we would have been way better off without this invention.
Starting off this list in no particular order, at number 10 we have 536. Let's start off this list by taking it pretty far back all the way to the year 536. In modern times, a lot of our terrible things that have happened in the terrible times we have lived through have been because of the things that we as humans do and then later have to suffer the consequences. This was of course the case in 536 as well, but they faced something much larger in this year that truthfully wasn't anyone's fault at all. In 536 there was one of the worst global famines in human history because there was a lack of sunlight at the time. The earth used to be a very different place, and during these times there were a series of large volcanic eruptions which sent volcanic ash into the air, thus blocking the light of the sun. This effectively dropped the temperature of the earth as well, so people had to live in the cold for 18 months, and many people ended up passing away due to starvation, famine, and cold. This, coupled with the brutal conflicts that could be seen in many parts of the world at the time, it totally makes sense that this year would be regarded as one of the worst in history.
Number 9. Josh Maddox, Colorado. On May 8, 2008, Josh Maddox left the house, telling his sister Kate that he was going out for a walk. He often went out hiking alone, so when his sister saw him at the house before he left, she thought little of it. But when he failed to return later that evening, his family became worried. On May 13th, 5 days after he disappeared, his father, Mike, called the police to report Josh missing. The authorities, friends, and family scoured the neighborhood and nearby Parkland area where Josh may have decided to go walking. After months of searching, nothing had been uncovered and hopes faded. Then 7 years later, in August 2015, less than a mile away from Josh's home, property developer Chuck Murphy was demolishing an old wood cabin to make way for 32 new family homes. Now, the cabin had been used in years and the inside was damp and rotten. Work to demolish the chimney inside the cabin started, and to the surprise of the demolition team, crammed inside the brickwork was a mummified body, which was later confirmed as Josh's. His body was naked apart from a thin shirt, and his clothes were neatly stacked inside the cabin. Now, an autopsy found no evidence of any in Josh's remains. He said, "The hard tissue showed no signs of trauma, there were no broken bones, no knife marks, there were no bullet holes. There is so far no answers to a number of things. It is very confusing, it was not an instant death. It seems like we might never know what happened to Josh that fateful day."
Number 8, the Peninsula Python. So this incident involved the discovery of a large python in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Peninsula, Ohio in the summer of 1944. The question obviously was, how did this python, native to tropical regions, end up in a park in Ohio? For a while, authorities didn't even think the reports were real, or at least they didn't think people were really seeing what they thought they were seeing. A massive snake stalking the area became something of an urban legend at the time, but turns out that there indeed was a python, and as to how it got there, some believed it had been a pet released by its owner, others speculated it had escaped from a traveling circus or a private exotic animal collection. It's still a bit of a mystery to this day as to how it really got there. The python was never even found. It likely died during the winter, but some say it is still stalking its way out there.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Richie Edwards. Richie Edwards was a prominent member of the Welsh rock band Manic Street Preachers, and he mysteriously vanished without a trace on February 1st, 1995. In a very perplexing turn of events, Edwards checked out of his London hotel and seemingly vanished from the public eye. Despite exhaustive searches, thorough investigations, and a dedicated effort to uncover the truth, no concrete evidence or clues pertaining to his whereabouts have ever been discovered. The enigma surrounding Edwards' disappearance has sparked a plethora of theories and speculations. Some believe he may have taken his own life, pointing to his history of depression and self-destructive behavior. Others suggest the possibility of a voluntary disappearance fueled by his desire to escape the pressures of fame and public scrutiny, and astonishingly, there are even those who entertain the notion that Edwards may still be alive, living a reclusive existence away from the spotlight. While the world of music mourns the loss of an exceptional talent, the true fate of Richie Edwards remains shrouded in uncertainty. In our number 6 spot today, we have immurement. This is an unusual form of punishment, and boy, it is cruel. Maybe not quite as gruesome and gory as some of the others today, but this one would have been equally, if not more, terrifying. How am I to know? Like I said last time, how could I ever rank these in any kind of order? They're all just so bad. This is a form of imprisonment that is basically just when a person is sealed within an enclosure that has no exits. While this would surely be a very effective form of psychological torment, this is usually a method that resulted in death. Most instances included people being shut away in small confined spaces such as a coffin, and the prisoner is usually left to pass away from starvation or dehydration. This form of punishment is different from being buried alive because of how the person passes away, since being buried alive usually results in asphyxiation. Okay guys, we're close to being halfway through, we can do it.
Next up at number 5, no appetite. Sometimes when you're feeling under the weather or on certain medication, it's not uncommon to find that your appetite has gone down. However, anyone who has ever met a teenager can attest that of all the people, they are usually the last to lose their appetite. But back in 2013, a 12-year-old named Landon Jones from Iowa baffled doctors after he suddenly woke up one morning feeling faint and with a horrible cough. His parents wasted no time immediately rushing him to the hospital, where it was discovered he had an infection in his left lung, and while the infection was promptly treated, the worst of it was yet to come. For whatever reason, ever since that day, Landon has never had any kind of appetite or thirst. The boy rapidly started losing weight, going from 104 pounds to just 68 right before his parents' eyes, all seemingly due to the fact that he never felt a hunger or thirst cue. As he continued losing weight, his parents were growing more and more worried about their son's strange condition. But no matter what doctor they took him to, they could never get an answer as to what was happening to him. Landon was given countless brain scans, psych evals, medical evals, and tested to make sure he didn't have an eating disorder. but nothing was providing them with an answer. Some doctors have wondered if he suffers from a brain dysfunction in the hypothalamus, the part that controls hunger and thirst, but his case remains unsolved.
Number 4. Death of the Black Dahlia. On January 15, 1947, Elizabeth Short, an aspiring actor, was found dead in residential Los Angeles. Her body was so mutilated as the body was cut in half and so pale and drained of blood that the woman who discovered it thought she had stumbled upon a mannequin. Now the body was cut with surgical precision, leaving no trauma to internal organs and bones. Her face was also cut from her mouth to ears, leaving an eerie permanent smile. There was no blood on the ground, making it believed that the body was moved after she had died. 9 days after she was discovered, an envelope was sent to the Examiner that read, "The Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." Now as promised, the envelope contained her social security card, birth certificate, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book. Then on March 14th, a note was found saying, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I'm too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." Now although many suspects were named, no authorities were able to identify who ended the Black Dahlia's life.
Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have Louis Julian West. For anyone out there that loves animals just as much as they love their fellow humans, this one is a scary one for you. West was quite the controversial scientist and researcher with ties to the top secret CIA project called Project MK Ultra. It was a project that used many US citizens, some of them even unwittingly, to use in other to see if these substances would have any mind control effects. West's studies are also believed to have major repercussions, such as of a young victim, as well as the death of a full-grown elephant. The reason he felt the need to experiment on elephants though, West knew that male elephants experienced fits, so he believed that he could induce an elephant rage with LSD. He gave the giant creature enough LSD to dose 3,000 people, and tragically, the elephant died. It was then that West concluded that elephants were sensitive to yeah, do you think? For many reasons, this guy seems like an evil scientist. From human and animals' deaths related to the overdose of I think it's safe to say that we don't want to get anywhere near this guy.
Coming in at number 2, we have Harry Harlow, aka the Monkey. Harry Harlow decided to see how strong a baby's connection is with their mother. For these experiments, he used baby monkeys and their moms. Here's the thing, he had this disturbing machine that would force monkeys to mate, and then he would basically the baby monkeys. His most controversial experiment was a device he called the Pit of Despair. Basically, he would place the newborn monkey in a small isolated chamber for periods up to a year. They had no contact with any living creature whatsoever. The monkeys ended up having serious problems that they could never grow out of. On a number of occasions he said, and I quote, "To be honest, I don't even know why I'm doing this." Another one of his famous quotes would be, and I quote, "You mean you don't like being fascinating." This dude was sick, and in the end, he had no real findings. He said, and I quote, "What is love? Well, you know that feeling you get when you've been locked in a tiny dark space alone for a year? It's the opposite of that." Like, what the actual heck? I could have even told you that. He just wanted an excuse to.
And in our number 1 spot today, we have Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Located in Kentucky, this hospital was originally built in 1910 as a hospital for patients with tuberculosis. Sadly, tons of patients ended up dying there from the disease. And the hospital did more harm than good. Rumor goes that the hospital was mistreating their patients and conducting experiments on them. In fact, they had an area in the hospital called the Death Tunnel, or Body Chute, where they would literally just dump the dead bodies down. So yeah, no surprise that this place is haunted. In this photo, you can clearly see a ghostly female figure standing in the now abandoned asylum. This is believed to be Mary Lee, a nurse who was impregnated by a doctor in the hospital. The doctor was then like, "Ha, that's not my problem, I don't actually love you." So Mary, not having many options, hung herself in one of the rooms at the hospital. This is a photo of her ghost. Starting off this countdown, we have lead paint. Exposure to even low levels of lead can cause serious damage, especially to children. Homes built before the 1960s most likely contain lead-based paint. This becomes a problem if the paint chips, peels, or flakes off, because then you have the risk of inhaling the lead paint particles. In fact, back in the day, lead acetate was used in the paint so that it would dry faster. Well, lead acetate has a sweet taste. In fact, it was given the name sugar of lead. Anyways, children were going around eating paint chips off of the floor or walls because it had a sweet taste to it. But of course, ingesting any level of lead is dangerous. It can cause irreversible brain damage in children or serious damage to the kidney and nervous system in both children and adults. Honestly, because of how dangerous it is, it's something that should have never been invented.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu is one of the deadliest pandemics that the world has ever seen, and it came in 4 different waves, each one getting more and more deadly than the last. Because of the fact that Spain was one of the first places that this flu was identified, it thus became known as the Spanish flu. This pandemic began in February of 1918 and ended in April of 1920, which means that this one was placed just as World War I was coming to an end, so a pandemic was absolutely the last thing people needed to be dealing with at the time. It is said that 500 million people were infected with the Spanish flu, and somewhere from 25 to 50 million of those people passed away from it, making it one of the most deadly pandemics ever.
Number 8. Dan Cooper, U.S. airspace. Now, one of the most famous heists in history occurred on November 24th, 1971, when a man who identified himself as Dan Cooper bought a one-way ticket to Seattle on Northwest Orient Airlines from Portland, Oregon. After the plane was airborne, Dan handed the flight attendant a note. Now, at first, she just put it in her pocket without looking at it, but then he told her, "Miss, you better look at that note, I have a..." He then opened a briefcase to reveal red-colored sticks surrounded by an array of wires. He told the flight attendant to write down everything he was saying and then take it to the captain. The note said, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash exclusively and $20 bills, put in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." FBI agents assembled the ransom money and Seattle police obtained the parachutes from a local skydiving school. When Dan claimed his demands were met, he allowed all passengers and some of the crew to exit the airplane. He told the remaining crew to refuel the plane and chart a course for Mexico City while staying below 10,000 feet. Then somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he jumped from the plane with the money and was never seen again. Now, despite an expansive manhunt and over 45 years of searching, no conclusions have been made as to the man's identity or his fate after he jumped. Today, it is called one of the greatest cold cases in FBI and US history.
At number 7 is Bible John, who operated in Glasgow back in 1968 and 69. But what's so baffling about this case, you ask? Well, it's the fact that this guy managed to off 3 people without ever getting caught. All of his victims were brunettes between the ages of 25 and 32. They all crossed paths with their sinister dance partner at the Barlow Land Ballroom, a place for fun and music that turned into a nightmarish crime scheme. But it didn't stop there, folks. This guy was called Bible John because he had a knack for quoting scripture and condemning adultery, especially when he was with his last victim. The police have never been able to pin down his identity, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in history. And what's even more mind-boggling is that some folks even thought Peter Taubin, another convicted serial unaliver, might be Bible John, but nope, he got eliminated as a suspect. And the mystery lingers on.
Next on the list, we have the disappearance of Brian Schaefer. In 2006, Brian Schaefer, a medical student at Ohio State University, completely vanished. On the night of March 31st, Schaefer went out with friends to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar near the campus in Columbus. Surveillance footage captured him entering the bar, but never showed him actually leaving. When his friends realized he was missing, they figured he'd gone home, but he hadn't. And surveillance footage from the bar showed footage of Brian speaking with 2 women outside the bar just before 2 a.m. His friends had already left at this point. Then he went back inside and that was it. No trace of him after that. And here's the thing, the bar only had 1 entrance, monitored by surveillance cameras, which didn't record Brian leaving. On top of that, there were no signs of foul play in his apartment. Over the years, there's been lots of speculation as to what happened here, but one theory is that he voluntarily disappeared and is alive, hopefully anyway, living with a new identity.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Jack Nance. Jack Nance was an actor best known for the series Twin Peaks, and on December 29th, 1996, Jack had lunch with a couple of friends and they noticed he had a bruise under his eye. When they asked him about how he got it, he just said he got into it with someone outside of a donut shop and that he guessed he got what he deserved. Jack left the lunch complaining of a headache, and the next day he was found passed away in his home. It turns out his injuries had caused a subdural hematoma, which was his cause of death. This would mean whoever he got into a fight with, whether it was an accident or not, was the one who caused his death and should most certainly have to pay some kind of price for that, but no one knows who this person is or was. It really does make you wonder if this person knew who they had punched, and if they knew that they caused his death, you really hope that if they did, they would have come forward. In our number 3 spot today, we have impalement. This is another one that was highly requested by you guys, which makes me wonder, who have you been hanging out with? Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler or something? Okay, that wasn't funny, but seriously, I'm a little worried about you. Anyway, this was a popular form of punishment for a long time and was most commonly used as a response to crimes against the state, although Mr. Vlad we just mentioned basically just did it to everyone he didn't like, so I suppose to each their own. Impalement was a method of both and that involved slowly driving a stake or pole or spear or hook or whatever through a person in order to completely or partially perforate the torso. You can impale someone vertically or horizontally if you want to spice it up, and don't worry, it'll suck either way. In some situations, the impaled person would then be put on display for others to see. Sometimes this was used as a warning, and other times it was just because they could. Isn't history fun? Mr. G never taught me this in grade 10.
Coming in at number 2, twins. There are lots of different kinds of perplexing conditions that have popped up in the medical world over the years, but one of the wildest has to be the story of Sanju Bhagat. Most of his life, Sanju had been incredibly self-conscious about his large stomach, which he described as once being so big he appeared to be 9 months pregnant. What's even more shocking is that for whatever reason, he never received any kind of medical attention for his protruding belly. That was until one day in 1999 when Sanju began to experience shortness of breath and was rushed to the hospital. When he got there, the doctors assumed Sanju had a large tumor in his abdomen and rushed him into the operating room to remove it. However, instead of an enormous tumor they expected, they could not believe their eyes when they opened him up and found the remains of a half-formed twin that had been living inside of him the last 36 years. The condition, called fetus in fetu, is incredibly rare, having only been documented 90 times in medical literature throughout history. As it turns out, when Sanju had been in the womb, his twin had become trapped inside and essentially became a parasite. Most that suffer this condition do not live long, often not even surviving inside their own mother, so doctors were completely flabbergasted and unable to explain how this man had lived 36 years with the twin inside of him.
And coming in at number 1 is Elliott Smith's death. Elliott Smith was a musician and singer-songwriter. There was lots of controversy surrounding his death, as it was just strange. Elliott died on October 21st, 2003 from 2 stab wounds to the chest. He was at his apartment where he lived with his girlfriend, Jennifer Chiba. According to Jennifer, the two were arguing and she locked herself in the bathroom to take a shower. She heard him scream, and upon opening the door saw Elliott standing with a knife in his chest. She pulled the knife out, after which he collapsed and she called 911. While his death was reported as him taking his own life, the official autopsy report released in December 2003 left open the question of homicide. The report said that he had been stabbed twice, both wounds had entered his chest cavity, and one had perforated his heart. That in itself is not suspicious. Gruesome as it sounds, people who choose to stab themselves to death frequently jab the weapon into their chest a number of times. Elliott, however, had no hesitation wounds, cuts made as the victim works up the nerve to force the weapon through, and he had stabbed himself through his clothing. The autopsy also found small lacerations on both of his hands and under his right arm, which it described as possible defensive wounds. Claim that Jennifer reported removal of the knife from Elliott and subsequent refusal to speak with detectives were all of concern.
Starting us off at number 10, we have Giovanni Aldini. Aldini is one of the many scientists who is actually the inspiration for the infamous Mary Shelley novel, Frankenstein. Aldini was a 19th century physicist obsessed with the effects of electrocution. Who isn't, am I right? Anyway, he was a bit of a celebrity and he was known to travel throughout Europe demonstrating the powers of electricity. What makes this guy evil though? Well, he was one of the first scientists to use electrical shocks on mental patients. He also enjoyed electrocuting corpses. One of his most famous acts involved him displaying a body of a hanged criminal and then shocking the body to then make the muscles contract and spasm as if the deceased was still alive. I get it. Electricity is cool, but how about a little respect for the dead? Aldini was also highly respected at the time. The Emperor of Austria even made him a Knight of the Iron Crown. Ooh, sounds evil, doesn't it?
Number 9, Andrew Cunanan, the man who shot Gianni Versace. Andrew had an IQ of 147, memorized a whole set of encyclopedias by the time he was 10 years old, and by the time he was 21, he could speak 7 languages. So, where did it go wrong? There is no clear reason, but whatever it was, Andrew loved to lie about it. He was a prolific liar and made large claims about his family's origins, to the delight of the rich older men who indulged him. He craved a lavish, carefree lifestyle, which rich millionaire Norman Blanchard gave him until he had enough sense to throw him out. This was a massive blow to Andrew's ego, and this led to a downward spiral which claimed the lives of 5 people. His ex-best friend Jeffrey Trail, his former lover David Madsen, Lee Miglin, William Reese, and then lastly Gianni Versace on July 15th, 1997. There are a lot of missing pieces in this case. Due to Andrew's disillusionment and the passion for lying, no one really knows why these happened, or even if he really knew Gianni before he shot him. By the time authorities caught up with him, Andrew had taken his own life, and there was no note left behind. So whatever the reason for his killing spree, perhaps even Andrew didn't even know the truth by the end.
Coming in at number 8, we have William Buckland. This dude, well, he was interesting. He was a geologist and paleontologist, but had a weird hobby he would partake in, which was eating things he shouldn't be eating. He ate things including roasted hedgehog, puppies, bat urine, ostriches, you get it, okay? That's not all. Apparently, he ate the shrunken heart of King Louis XIV. Yeah, you heard me. This dude, for some reason, ate a nasty old dead person's heart. Eating all of this weird stuff was apparently part of his experiments. Which was what? Seeing what weird thing would taste the best? I don't know what was going on here.
In our 7th spot today, we have the dead. Another sign of paranormal activity is finding an abundance of dead bugs in or around your house. If the spirit is malevolent, its evil energy will drain the life of those around it, killing indoor and outdoor plants, animals, bugs, you name it. One woman named Shirley knew she was haunted when she started finding a number of dead moths on her windowsill. Moths are often the insects that demons love, for some reason. Then Shelley's houseplants started dying out of nowhere, despite some of them being brand new. She got really scared when she woke up one morning to 3 dead crows around her house. I hope she cleansed herself and that house or got the heck out of there, cause something was definitely coming for her.
In our number 5 spot today, we have colonization. Being in the Americas during colonization is definitely a time period that we have to talk about today. When Columbus took his voyage in 1492, there were somewhere from 10 million to 100 million people already living in the Americas, people who are indigenous to the land. With this voyage, those coming to settle on the land brought with them many diseases that caused a massive population decline for the people already living here. The Americas had been quite isolated up until this point, so the indigenous people already living on the land hadn't been exposed to these sorts of illnesses that suddenly became introduced onto their land. If dealing with illnesses like smallpox spreading like wildfire wasn't enough, many indigenous tribes also had to deal with the brutal wars being waged on them, as well as later having to deal with the new settlers trying to completely change their ways of life. The colonization of the Americas destroyed the tribe society, and it robbed a lot of people the chance to practice their family traditions and way of life. It is said that through colonization there was about a 90% decline in the populations of those indigenous to the land.
Number 4. The Axeman, New Orleans. From 1918 to 1919, the Axeman of New Orleans ended the lives of 6 people and left 6 more severely injured. An Italian grocery store owner and his wife were the first victims. They were found in bed at home with their throats cut and skulls bashed in with an axe. The victims who followed were also found in bed, and no valuable belongings were taken. A newspaper received a letter with demands for the following Tuesday night that said, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home jazz band plays in full swing at the time I've just mentioned." If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of you people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Now on that Tuesday night, the streets of New Orleans filled with jazz and nobody was harmed. Then in October 1919, the deaths ended just as quickly as they had begun, and the criminal was never found.
And number 3 is the Oakland County Unaliver. Between 76 and 77, 4 young people disappeared without a trace. Their bodies were later discovered, each placed in plain sight along roadways in Oakland County. This gruesome puzzle remains one of America's most unsettling unsolved mysteries. Forensic advancements have shed light on potential suspects, but they've only deepened the enigma. DNA testing indirectly implicated 2 individuals, but the main perpetrator's identity remains hidden. One suspect passed away, and the other is serving a life sentence for unrelated crimes. Even with a DNA profile of the Unaliver, no match has emerged.
In its second place, we have the Crosswick monster. This incident took place in 1982 and has become a prominent tale in Ohio's cryptid folklore. According to this story, 2 young boys, Ed and Joe Lynch, encountered a terrifying creature in a field. They heard peculiar noises coming from the tall grass, and before they could react, a massive 4-legged lizard-like beast emerged. The creature swiftly approached them, grabbing 13-year-old Ed in its jaws and began dragging him towards a hollowed-out tree. Fortunately, though, the boys' screams caught the attention of 3 nearby men who rushed in to help. They managed to rescue Ed, but he sustained some pretty severe injuries. In response to this initial attack, a group of 60 men armed themselves with axes and clubs, and I'm imagining torches, and they formed a posse to hunt down this creature. They managed to catch up with it, and at one point it stood up on its hind legs. The chase led them to a hill of rocks where the creature vanished into a hole, never to be seen again. The story was written up in the local paper at the time, and it's since grown to be a staple of Ohio's folklore. Just what the hell was the thing that they saw that day? And finally, at our number 1 spot, we have the Circleville Rider. The Circleville letters case, which began in 1976 in Circleville, Ohio. Is it Circleville or Circleville? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, it's still one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in the state. It all began with these anonymous, threatening letters sent to numerous residents. The letters contained detailed, personal information about the recipients' lives, leading to this fear and paranoia throughout the community. The mysterious writer knew intimate details about the victims' private lives and warned them to cease certain behaviors. One of the primary recipients, Mary Gillespie, was particularly targeted. The sender claimed she had been having an affair, which Mary insisted was not true, and the situation escalated when Mary's husband, Ron Gillespie, received a letter warning him that he would be unalived. The case took a tragic turn when Ron Gillespie was found dead in his crashed car. His death was ruled an accident, but many suspected foul play. The letters persisted even after Ron's death, leaving the town baffled about the identity of the sender. Several theories emerged, including suspicions about a local school superintendent and Mary's brother-in-law, but no conclusive evidence was ever found, leaving the case unsolved. This incident has inspired numerous legends and conspiracy theories. Stories have spread about the letters having been written by some sort of vengeful ghost or spirit haunting the town, even.
And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Virginia Rapp. Virginia was a model and silent film actor before her passing in 1921. On September 5th of that year, she went to a party at Roscoe Arbuckle's suite at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. There are many accounts of what exactly happened this night, but none match up exactly, so what really happened is still quite unclear. Virginia suffered some sort of trauma at this party and was taken to the hospital, where she passed away on the 9th due to a ruptured bladder and the subsequent infection in the wall of her abdomen due to that. There are 2 main possibilities for what happened to Virginia that night at the party. The first theory is that some underlying health conditions she had, such as a UTI or STI, mixed with the consuming of alcohol, may have caused this. I am certainly not a doctor, so I'm not sure how possible or likely this is, but it is one of the main speculations. The other one, which many people insist is what actually happened, is that her injuries were caused by a violent attack on her by Roscoe. This was first claimed by the person who went to the party with Virginia, but they were often discredited due to their record of extortion and blackmail. Roscoe went through 3 trials, but was ultimately acquitted for the crime. Even though this happened a full century ago, many people still debate what may have happened to Virginia that night, and unfortunately, we may never know. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Blood Eagle. This messed up thing was a ritual method of execution that was detailed in late skaldic poetry. In the 2 instances where this horrible punishment was mentioned, the victims, who both happened to be members of the royal family, were placed in the prone position. So, laying flat on their tummies, they had their ribs severed from their spine using a sharp tool, and then they had their lungs pulled out through the opening to create a sort of super messed up, really scary and terrifying pair of wings. Both instances where this insane punishment is said to have happened, the person was being punished for patricide or for killing their own father, so I guess don't do that? I'm not sure what the takeaway from this one is other than, wow, that sounds horrible, I'm glad we don't do that anymore, I really love my dad.
Coming in at number 9, Stone Tears. When Chandy was 15, she woke one morning feeling like there was something stuck in her eye. To her surprise, when she went to go and look in the mirror, there was a small stone in her eye, appearing to be coming from her tear duct. Ever since that day in July of 2021, Chadney and her family say that the young girl has cried stones out of her eyes several times a day, every day, and no one has any clue why, or frankly how this could be happening. Allegedly, in just the 2 months since the ordeal began, Chadney collected nearly 70 stones that had fallen out of her eyes. The family lives in a small rural village in India, and they don't have much money to send her to specialists, but have posted videos online to try and get help for their daughter. According to the doctors that weigh in, there is no known existing condition that could be associated with this, so it's definitely disturbing, especially considering that from what anyone can tell, nothing seems to be out of the ordinary in her actual eyes. Now, truth be told, there are some doctors out there who think it could be a hoax, but nothing has been confirmed, and honestly, no one really knows what is going on.
Number 8. Natalie Wood's death. On November 29, 1981, the actress and movie star Natalie Wood drowned while on a boating trip with her husband, Robert Wagner. Robert had reported Natalie missing after a night of drinking, and her body was found several hours later, floating face down in the water, wearing a flannel nightgown, down jacket, and socks. Now, at first, her death was ruled accidental, but the bruises on her body led law enforcement to consider foul play, with Robert as the prime suspect. The couple had an argument on the yacht before she went missing, a fact Robert initially denied, but fully admitted to in his 2008 autobiography, further arousing suspicions in the fact that 4 hours had elapsed between the time Robert and Dennis Davrin, the captain, realized Natalie was missing and when they called the Coast Guard. Most concerning though were the statements that Lana Wood alleges the boat captain Dennis Davrin made to her on a drunken phone call. According to Lana, Dennis said that after the star couple quarreled, it appeared to him as though RJ, Robert Wagner, shoved her away and she went overboard. Dennis panicked and RJ said, "Leave her there, teach her a lesson." Lana added that Dennis didn't think Robert intended for her sister to drown, but he didn't run to her aid.
At number 7, we have Albert Bandura. Bandura is a famous psychologist who, interestingly enough, just passed away days ago in California. He is famous for being one of the first scientists to discover that learning occurs both through beliefs and through social modeling, which then led to the social cognitive theory. One of his most famous experiments he ever conducted was back in 1961 and was titled the Bobo Doll Experiment. In this experiment, Bandura hired researchers to physically and verbally abuse a clown-faced inflatable toy in front of many preschool-aged children, which, when the adult researchers left and the children were left alone with the already beat-up doll, the children took on the attitudes of the adults and began yelling and beating up the doll as well. This was later to prove the theory that children were indeed influenced by the violence in media and helped prove his later social cognitive theory. The theory that a person's environment, cognition, and behavior all interact to determine how that person functions, as opposed to one of those factors playing a dominant role. Teaching kids to be future bullies in the schoolyard? Pure monkey see evil, pure monkey do evil.
Number 6, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, we all know he was gonna be on this. I want to be clear about something. Having a high IQ is dependent on a lot of things. Education, nutrition, environment, etc. It doesn't necessarily mean you're dumb or smart or that you won't or will be successful. Somehow, the same man who drilled holes into humans' heads to turn them into zombies had an IQ of 145. So put that together. Dahmer became known as the Milwaukee Killer and is one of the most prolific serial killers to ever exist. He became fixated on animals at a young age. We know what happens after that, right? In 1978, Dahmer dropped out of business school due to abuse after just 3 months. He enlisted in the US Army to train as a medical specialist, but that didn't last long. He was discharged after he attacked 2 fellow soldiers. After that, Dahmer's mental health deteriorated even further, and he fell hard into alcoholism and began his killing spree. After one of his victims escaped and notified the police, when they got there, the chief medical examiner remarked, and I quote, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene." Between 1971 and 1999, he killed 17 men in a variety of gruesome ways and celebrated each one with like trophies. Dahmer was killed behind bars by another inmate in 1994, and that is the end of his story.
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Andrew Ure. This dude conducted a number of experiments on corpses. This involved taking dead people into the public and then shocking their body so that it would move. He then would control the dead body with these electrical probes. By doing so, he could cause the deceased eyes to open, their arms to move, and even change their facial expressions. He basically was a puppeteer for real dead people. Just let that sink in.
Moving on to number 4, we have 2 girls, 1 ghost. This photo was taken in Manila, Philippines in the early 2000s. It features 2 friends and a ghostly entity grabbing onto one of the girls' arms. They were terrified when they saw the outcome of this photo. They claimed that no one else was with them when the photo was taken, nor did they even feel a ghostly presence. Also, this photo was taken on a digital camera, so it's not like double exposure was to blame here. It's hella creepy how the ghostly arm is literally like reaching out to the girl and grabbing her. Run for your life, girl, run. Moving on to number 3, we have the radium products. Before we knew how dangerous radium was for us, doctors and companies were using it in a number of products. It was being put in water, toothpaste, makeup, etc. It was thought to be this magical substance that would make you healthier and more attractive. Little did they know, it could kill you. There was this one man whose name was Eben Byers. He was taking this radium powder which he believed would increase his sex drive. In the end, his lower jaw fell off because he was using this so much. Like what? That's terrifying.
In our number 2 spot today, we have the Mongol invasion. Being in China during the Mongol invasion certainly was a terrifying time. I'm sure a lot of us here have heard at least some of the stories surrounding Genghis Khan, but if you haven't, let's just say that being on his bad side certainly wasn't a good thing for you. In 1205, when the Mongol invasion in China began, it was the regular citizens of China who paid the ultimate price. What was started by Genghis Khan was carried on by his son and then his grandson, which ultimately led to a 74-year-long campaign that was filled with brutality and destruction. Cities and towns were destroyed, empires were brought down, and millions of innocent people lost their lives. It is believed that this invasion took the lives of enough people to cut the population in half from 120 million before to just 60 million after. Anyone living in China at this time would have had to live in absolute fear of being killed for something that you had nothing to do with. That would just be awful and terrifying.
And coming in at number 1 is Tara Calico, New Mexico. On the morning of September 20th, 1988 in Bella, New Mexico, Tara Calico borrowed her mother's pink bike to go out for a ride. She planned to play tennis that afternoon and asked her mom to drive out after her in case she got a flat tire and didn't return home by noon. Now she never did return and no one knew what happened to her. Every lead went dead until about a year later when a photo was found depicting a young woman, her age, and a missing boy, both gagged. The Polaroid photograph was found in a parking lot outside a junior food store in Florida. Michael Henley went missing in the same area as Tara in April of 1988 when he was hunting turkeys with his father. Now they appear to be in the back of a van with a copy of a book written by V.C. Andrews, Tara's favorite author, lying right beside the girl. Now initially Tara's mother didn't think the girl was her, but the girl in the photograph had a scar identical to Tara's. In 1990, Michael Henley's body was found in Zuni Mountains where he was hunting, which strongly disconnected the theory that the two were abducted and taken to Florida, but unfortunately Tara's Laura's parents would eventually die, never finding out who took their daughter.
Alright, next on the list we have Munchkinland. This urban legend of Munchkinland, also known as Tiny Town in Cincinnati, Ohio, centers around a peculiar area near Rumpke Landfill. Here, a cluster of small houses and buildings allegedly housed a community of little people. According to local lore, these tiny inhabitants were notorious for hurling rocks at passing cars, attempting to deter any intruders. Numerous tales circulated about unsuspecting individuals who stopped their cars in the vicinity only to find themselves confronted by enraged little folk armed with rocks and ready to defend their territory. As to where these little people are said to have come from, the legend goes that they were retired circus performers. Now, there actually was a collection of small structures in this area. They've recently been torn down, I believe. But as to why they were there are lots of different stories, including, of course, that they were built by the little retired circus performers. A more likely explanation, though, is that they had been built by a farmer on the land who had decided he wanted to start running hay rides, and that he, built the houses on the property. But I think it's still a bit murky as to how they got there.
In our number 8 spot today, we have Jill Dando. Jill was an English journalist and a television presenter until she was killed outside of her southwest London home in 1999. This created the biggest manhunt the country had seen since the Yorkshire Ripper in the 70s. A man named Barry George was originally convicted and sentenced to prison for this terrible crime, but he ended up actually being acquitted years later, which now leaves this case unsolved. Jill's next door neighbor heard a surprised gasp from Jill, but he never heard a shot and said it sounded more like someone who was greeting an old friend. The same neighbor looked out of the window and actually saw whoever the killer is, but of course at the time didn't know who he was or what had just happened, and he didn't recognize the man, so he was unable to give an identification. There are tons of speculations and rumors about who took Jill's life, and it ranges from a potential stalker to maybe even a hit job. Hopefully one day there will be answers on why someone would have done something so horrible to Jill. In our number 7 spot today, we have Mazzatello. This one was a method of capital punishment that was occasionally used by the Papal States for only some of the most terrible crimes, or crimes that were considered especially loathsome. Basically, the person who was being executed would be led to a scaffold that was located in the public square because they didn't have Netflix back then, so instead they just watched people die. I don't know, it was weird. I'll keep watching Nailed It instead. But anyway, the person would be accompanied by a priest, and then on this scaffold there would be a coffin and a masked executioner who was dressed in all black. A prayer would be said for the soul of the condemned, and then when the time came, the executioner would swing a mallet into the air and then bring it down on the head of the prisoner. Sometimes this one blow would be enough to take their lives, and sometimes it would merely render them unconscious, which would then lead to their throat being cut. None of these sound good. This one sucks so bad. I feel bad giving you guys this information. Next video, can it be like top 10 nice, cool, wonderful flowers or something like that?
Next up at number 6, foreign accent syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly talking in a completely different accent than you have your entire life. While some people might think that you're doing a bit, believe it or not, there is an actual mystery called foreign accent syndrome, or FAS, where the very thing can happen. Most famously was the case in 1941 when a Norwegian woman suffered a traumatic brain injury during an air raid and suddenly and uncontrollably began speaking with a strong German accent. But others include an American woman who suddenly spoke in a mixture of Australian, Irish, and British after a car accident, as well as an Australian woman who suddenly spoke with a French accent after going to sleep with a headache. For a while it was regarded as a psychological disorder, however it is now associated as more of a neurological one, usually onset by head trauma or a stroke. But the part that scientists have not been able to wrap their brains around is how on earth people can seemingly speak in an accent they have never been exposed to. When learning to speak, your natural accent is a result of sound patterns you unconsciously learn, otherwise known as the phonetic system. When you are young, accents can shift as you become exposed to new speech patterns, but by the time you reach your teen years, your phonetic system is pretty much locked in. But FAS somehow affects the entire patterning of your phonetic system and continues to perplex doctors all over the world.
Number 5, Marilyn Monroe's death. The world was shaken on August 5th, 1962 when Marilyn Monroe was found dead at the age of 36 in her home in Los Angeles. The cause? A overdose that was ruled as her most likely taking her own life. Now this led many to doubt the star, rumored to have been involved in extramarital affairs with both John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy, had taken her own life. Instead, conspiracy theories have long suspected that Marilyn had her life ended by being forced to take the that resulted in her death to keep her from talking about the Kennedy brothers. Now to this day, the CIA continues to maintain files on Marilyn's death, but it is unlikely anyone will ever know what really happened.
At number 4 we have Duncan McDougall. McDougall was born in 1866 in Glasgow, Scotland, and later moved to Haverhill, Massachusetts. One of his most famous experiments he conducted was the 21 grams experiment, where he placed a dying patient on a cot that was on a scale and weighed the patient before and after the moment of death. His findings? That immediately after death, the deceased weighed 21 grams less, meaning that the soul was indeed a physical part to a human's body and that it did indeed leave once a person passed away. The work was absolutely destroyed in the scientific community, but defended in the religious community, as they deemed this was proof of a soul in a person's body. But what makes this guy evil? Well, he conducted the exact same experiment with dogs and noticed no weight change at all. He then made the statement that dogs don't have souls. Dogs don't have souls? You don't have a soul, you jerk! You say one more wrong thing about me, mutt, and I'll shove your pipes right up your kilt.
Number 3, Mao Zedong. It surprises me to no end that while I was in high school, we spent all of our time learning about Rudolf, but this guy totally slipped under the radar. I know the phrase pick your battles exists, but did no one think to pick this fight? Am I missing something? Let me know in the comments. Admittedly, the world probably couldn't handle it after the 85 million people who were lost in World War II, but from 1966 to 1976, Mao Zedong killed over 65 million of his own people in a vicious attempt to establish socialism. From mass starvation to burying 46,000 scholars alive, to flat out killing anyone who got in his way, he was vicious, brutal, and inhumane. His disastrous policies and revisions led to 50% of most villages dying from starvation. As his plans continued to fail, he developed the Red Army, a force composed of girls and boys from the ages 14 to 21 to roam cities and target enemies of the state, especially their teachers. Educated people, after all, are the biggest threat to poor leadership. They whisper ideas. So he would make them wear dunce hats, cover their faces with ink, and make them crawl on all fours and bark like dogs. Let's also not forget his expanded system of 1,000 forced labor camps. Need I say more?
Starting us off at number 10 is death by water. One of the fundamentals of human life is that we need water to survive. Not only that, we're made up of approximately 60% water. We sweat water, we clean ourselves with water, and essentially rely on it to get through the day. So what happens when someone is allergic to water? Well, their life becomes about 100 times more complicated. One of the biggest mysteries in the medical field is an extremely rare condition called aquatogenic urticaria, where the skin breaks out into extremely painful hives or rash anytime it's exposed to water. As of a 2013 medical review, only 37 cases have been reported since 1964, most of which were female, as well as most reporting the condition only arose during or right after puberty began. What's insane about this condition is that not only are the afflicted often allergic to rainwater, snow, fresh water, and seawater, but many are allergic to their own sweat and tears, and even worse is that some people get rashes or welts on their lips and mouth area from just trying to drink enough water to stay alive. While there are a few theories out there about what could cause this peculiar nightmare condition, the underlying cause has never been confirmed and continues to perplex the medical community to no end.
Number 9. Brittany Murphy's death. Actress Brittany Murphy was sick with pneumonia when she collapsed in the bathroom of her home. Firefighters attempted to resuscitate her before she was transported to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but 2 hours after the initial 911 call, she died at the hospital from cardiac arrest. An autopsy determined that Brittany died of pneumonia exacerbated by anemia and multiple intoxication. The over-the-counter cold medicines and prescription medications were all legal, but at elevated levels. Her husband Simon Monjack raised suspicions by initially refusing an autopsy to understand exactly what happened to his wife, but just 5 months later, Simon died in the same bedroom of eerily similar causes, pneumonia and anemia. He also had an elevated level of prescription drugs in his system. Many people believe that the home had toxic mold in it, and Brittany's mother dismissed this idea, as did the coroner, but she later became convinced toxic mold was the cause of the deaths while trying to sell the home. Brittany's father had a different theory, that she had her life ended by someone. I have a feeling that there was definitely a situation here. He told Good Morning America, "Yeah, it's poison, yes, I know that." The basis for this claim was the result of an independent toxicology report he had done on a sample of Brittany's hair. The report detailed the presence of 10 heavy metals in her hair, which the report claimed suggested the possibility of foul play. Her father later filed a suit against the Los Angeles coroner's office and the Los Angeles Police Department, hoping in vain to have his daughter's body re-examined and the case reopened.
At number 8, we have Jose Delgado. Back in the 1960s at Yale University, Professor Jose Delgado was working on some pretty scary stuff. Delgado invented one of the first ever brain chips. He was known to use these chips in bulls, monkeys, and humans. It is reported that he once stopped a charging bull in its tracks after pressing a button that activated the small chip inside the animal's head. With a touch of a button, these radio waves could make these animals snarl, growl, smile, invoke lust, hunger, and many more responses. Delgado recently described himself as a libertarian and pacifist whose goal as a scientist was to liberate us from our biology and especially mental illnesses and aggression. I don't know about that. It sounds a lot more to me like he was trying to take over the world with some pretty crazy mind control chips, but he was also known to test on mental patients. Whether this one is with good intentions or not, this one freaks the hell out of me.
Number 7, Lawrence Bittaker, aka the Toolbox Killer. Like many others on this list, a lot of potential to do good here, especially with an IQ of 138. But as this list kind of proves, just because your IQ sets high expectations doesn't mean you'll meet them. Bittaker was a high school dropout and turned to a life of crime early on. Bittaker, along with his accomplice Roy Norris, drove around in a blacked out van called the Mac. The two met while serving a sentence at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo after both had developed a liking for crime. Somehow the two made parole, and for 3 months in 1979 they did awful things to 5 women using hand tools. What they did to those poor women inside their van is enough to churn the bile in your stomach, so I won't go into much detail. A psychologist's analysis of Bittaker was that he was borderline psychotic, and Norris had a severe schizoid personality. The two were finally caught, with Norris receiving life in prison, and Bittaker died on death row at the age of 79.
Moving on, at number 6 we have Stubbins Firth. If you guys are eating or drinking anything right now, I suggest you stop. This one is gonna make you sick to your stomach. Basically, in the 19th century, training doctor Stubbins Firth decided to do experiments on yellow fever. This was to show that it wasn't contagious, so he would experiment on himself. He would literally smear bodily fluids from patients with yellow fever all over his body. That's not the gross part, believe me. He even took their vomit and drank it, all in the name of science. Anyways, the real reason why he didn't contract it was because all the patients were in the final stage of yellow fever. By then, they weren't contagious anymore. Like, there has to be something wrong with you if you're going around drinking vomit.
At our number 5 spot, we have Amy. On Lick Road, just outside of Cincinnati, a terrible incident is said to have taken place. A woman named Amy lost her life at the hands of someone, but the perpetrator was never found. The prevailing theory is that her boyfriend did it, though. As the years passed, tales of Amy's ghost haunting Lick Road began to spread, making the ghost of Amy one of the most prominent urban legends in Ohio. Supposedly, there are a couple ways to experience the ghost of Amy. One legend goes that if you flick your headlights onto the sign as you're turning on to Lick Road at night, you can see the name Amy briefly flash on the sign. Another goes that if you park your car at the cul-de-sac facing the woods, then flash your headlights 3 times, your windows will start to fog up with the word help being written in the condensation. Some nightly visitors have claimed to see the ghostly figure of Amy standing at the edge of the forest. Others claim to hear disembodied footsteps behind them as they make their way across the bridge.
In our number 4 spot today we have Thelma Todd. Thelma Todd was a wonderful comedic actor and well-respected woman, and on Monday, December 16th, 1935, Thelma was unfortunately found after she had passed away in her car. The circumstances surrounding her death have always baffled people. It is said that after leaving a dinner with friends, Thelma returned to her home, but she had been locked out, so she headed toward the home of Jewel Cartman, who was the former wife of Thelma's lover, Ronald West. When Thelma arrived there, it is speculated that she went down to the garage and got in the car, presumably to warm up. The death was eventually ruled accidental and the cause was carbon monoxide poisoning, but people just could not accept that answer. The night before Thelma was found, she was at a dinner party with friends, and the autopsy report showed the contents of her stomach were not things that they had been served at the dinner, which leaves the question, where did she go that night that has not been accounted for? Some people think she may have taken her own life, but people close to her say that they believe that it is highly unlikely. Some people accept that it may have been accidental, but some people believe some sort of foul play was involved.
Coming in at number 3, Eyes Shut. When Natalie Adler was 17, she awoke one morning to find that her eyelids were mysteriously swollen. While this was definitely alarming to Natalie, she didn't initially think much of it. Maybe it was allergies or something along those lines. However, next thing she knew, the condition was only getting worse. Her eyes started to become so swollen that she eventually wasn't able to open them up at all. Even stranger was that it began developing into an inexplicable cycle where they would spasm shut for 3 days, and then they would open for 3 days, and it did that for 13 years. By the time she was 30, doctors were still at a loss for what was causing her rare condition. A condition that is so rare, in fact, that it doesn't even have a name. And even after hundreds of tests, they are no closer to understanding her condition. Over the years, Natalie has undergone several surgeries, none of which have proved successful, however said that she does get Botox injections to help keep her eyes partially open, although she continues to suffer from random bouts of blindness each month. Although doctors have yet to come any closer on how to cure her condition, she continues to see eye specialists, hoping that one day her medical mystery will be solved.
Number 2, Shelley Miscavige disappearance. Shelley Miscavige is a member of the Church of Scientology Sea Org who married Scientology leader David Miscavige. She was last seen in public in August of 2007. Since her disappearance, she has been the subject of speculation and inquiries regarding her whereabouts and well-being. In 2012, attorneys who said they represented her responded by saying that she was merely living a private life devoted to the Church of Scientology. Some former Sea Org members have said that they believe Shelley is being held against her will at the compound of the Scientologist Church of Spiritual Technology Corporation near the mountain town of Running Springs in San Bernardino County, California. In August 2013, actress Leah Remini, a former Scientologist and critic of the organization, filed a missing persons report regarding Shelley with the Los Angeles Police Department, which was closed within hours by the LAPD as unfounded. So where is Shelley? It seems like we might never know.
And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot is most definitely the most evil scientist of them all. This is Josef Mengele. Josef was one of the most famous scientists at the most horrific concentration camp of World War II. A member of the Third Reich, Josef was a camp doctor. He was known to be one of the doctors to select the poor people who were to be sent to the gas chambers, and even went as far as volunteering for more and more shifts when he could. He also conducted many torturous and inhumane experiments on prisoners of all ages. After the war, Josef escaped to Argentina and was never captured by the authorities. He did, however, drown in 1979 in Brazil. While many on this list were half-jokingly evil and gone mad, I think anyone who takes pleasure in sending large numbers of people to their doom is most definitely evil, and I think mad just goes hand in hand with this one.
Number 10, H.H. Holmes. I had a feeling that if I didn't include him at least once, somebody would be like, "You're wrong!" So here he is. Ah yes, the genius inspired by Sherlock Holmes himself, though he ended up being the villain of the story and far from the hero. Henry Howard Holmes was indeed a genius. He skipped a ton of grades, finished school at just 16, and gained a doctorate of medicine at just 23. What was I doing at 23? I was in acting school. But he had a desire for the dark side he just could not shake. His interest in medicine began with practicing on animals. In medical school, he was already dabbling in darkness when he started conning insurance claims and stealing corpses. But for Holmes, everything was building towards his one goal in life, the construction of the castle. By 1800s Chicago, Holmes eventually earned enough money to construct a massive labyrinth within a hotel of sorts. It had stores on the bottom and apartments above, each level booby-trapped with trapdoors, mazes, and chutes that would drop his victims into a basement with like vats of acid and crematoriums where it was just like nuts. Historians still debate how many people he killed, but they're thinking around 200. Wish they caught him before this happened, but alas, here he is on this list.
Coming in at number 9, we have the Toys R Us ghost. Apparently the Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, California isn't so sunny. That's because the Toys R Us was built on what used to be farmland. Years ago, a man named Jan Johnson had a thing for a woman named Elizabeth, the daughter of the farmland's owner. But sadly, one day he lost his life while chopping wood. While doing so, the axe slipped and gouged him right in his leg. He slowly bled to death. Now it's believed that the store is haunted by Johnson's ghost, who roams the aisles looking for Elizabeth. Now this photo was taken in 1978. You see the man in the back leaning up against the shelves? That figure was not there when the photo was taken, so it's believed that that is the ghost of Johnson. How eerie. Coming in at number 8, we have the wearable parachute. Ever wanted to have the ability to fly on your own? Well, inventor Franz Rigelt did. In fact, he invented a wearable parachute. Basically, it was like one big cloak type sweater thing that you would slip into. He thought it would allow people to jump off of high places and then easily descend down. But it was a very dangerous invention for obvious reasons. On February 4th, 1912, Franz decided to test his invention in front of a crowd. He went to the top of the Eiffel Tower and jumped. Sadly, the parachute immediately folded around his body and he plummeted straight to his death.
In our number 7 spot today, we have the Black Death. I'm sure we've all heard of the Black Death at some point or another. I mean, because how could we ever possibly stop talking about something like that? During the 1340s, there was an outbreak of the bubonic plague that spread rapidly through Europe and Asia. It was called the Black Plague because of the fact that this illness would cause people's lymph nodes to become swollen and black. The Black Death was absolutely terrible and it caused agony for those who had to go through it. Symptoms included things like severe body aches, fever, vomiting, and eventual death in almost all of the cases. There was no cure for the plague, so it just continued to spread. In the end, the Black Death took the lives of hundreds of millions of people. We now know firsthand what it is like to live through a pandemic, and I certainly wouldn't sign up to do it again anytime soon, so I'm most definitely sure that the times of the Black Death were some of the worst in history.
Number 6. Amber Hagerman, Texas. A young Amber Hagerman was riding her bicycle in a parking lot of an abandoned grocery store in Arlington, Texas on January 13, 1996 when she was kidnapped. A witness told police that he saw a man get out of a black pickup truck, grab her off the bicycle, and forced her into his truck as she kicked and screamed. Now despite the massive search, she wasn't found, and then 4 days later, a man walking his dog found Amber's body in a creek about 4 miles from where she was abducted. Autopsy reports revealed that she had died of cut wounds to the neck. Now, as of January of last year, police have received and investigated more than 7,000 tips related to the case. I miss her every day, and she's just so full of life, and I want to know why. Why her? She was only a little girl, Amber's mother, Donna Williams, said last year. Now, police say there is limited evidence in the case, but they hope that the new DNA technologies can help them catch who was responsible. Now, her abduction led to the invention of Amber Alerts, and although some people might think they're annoying, they do save lives.
At number 4 is the Gileo Beach Serial Unalivings, a spine-tingling mystery that spans nearly 2 decades, casting a shadow over Long Island, New York. Between 1996 and 2011, the remains of 11 people were discovered, with the majority being workers of the night who had advertised their services on Craigslist. The grim saga began with the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, leading to an intensive police search in the vicinity of Ocean Park near Gileo Oak Beach. In December 2010, the remains of the Gileo 4 were unearthed within a quarter mile of each other, only to be followed by the discovery of 6 more sets of remains in March and April of 2011. Now, the cause of the unaliving itself remains disputed, with police proposing accidental drowning, while an independent autopsy suggested possible strangulation. In a startling twist, the arrest of Rex Hauerman in July of 2023 brought some closure to the case, as he was charged in connection with the unalivings of 3 of the Gilo 4 victims, and emerged as the prime suspect in the 4th fourth victim's demise. Yet, the lingering mystery remains. Who else might be involved, and what other horrors lie concealed in the shadows of Gileo Beach?
The Werewolf of Defiance. So in the summer of 1972, the small town of Defiance, Ohio was rocked by a series of bizarre and terrifying encounters with what locals would describe as the Werewolf of Defiance. First reported sighting occurred when two railroad workers, Ted Davis and Tom Jones, were laboring on the Norfolk and Western Railway. Ted Davis, busy with his work, suddenly looked up to witness something completely unexplainable. A large wolf-like creature clutching a wooden board in its paws. The creature then just whacked Ted on the shoulder with the board before vanishing into the nearby bushes. I like the imagery of that. Just a werewolf come walking out. Bam! All right, goodbye. Anyway, 5 days later, Ted and Tom returned to work, hoping that the strange encounter was just a one-time event. But unfortunately, they spotted this pesky werewolf again. Luckily, it was much further away this time, and they just booked it out of there. They reported the incident to the local police, and before long, this wave of similar reports flooded in from various parts of Defiance. More and more residents claimed to have encountered a wolf man-like creature. People were scared to go outside. Like, nobody wants to be gored by a massive-sized wolf person. The sightings, did trail off, but the Wolfman of Defiance has remained a legend of Ohio ever since.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Bruce Lee. The world was left in shock on July 20th, 1973, when Bruce Lee, the iconic martial artist and actor, passed away unexpectedly at the very young age of 32. The cause of his untimely demise, attributed to cerebral edema, sparked a flurry of speculation and enduring theories that continue to captivate enthusiasts and fans to this day. Numerous hypotheses have emerged, each offering a different perspective on the circumstances surrounding Lee's tragic death. Some proponents of foul play suggest hidden motives behind his demise, pointing to potential enemies or conspiracies within the entertainment industry. On the other hand, another school of thought suggests that Lee's demise was an unfortunate result of an adverse reaction to medication. Despite extensive investigations and medical examinations, the exact cause of Bruce Lee's death remains a subject of debate and ambiguity. The elusiveness of the truth adds an air of mystery and intrigue to his already legendary status, leaving admirers to ponder the final moments of the martial arts legend and mourn the loss of a remarkable talent that was taken far too soon. In our number 1 spot today, we have scaphism. Alright, you guys, this one is also known as the boats, or being eaten alive, or really whatever way you swing it, it absolutely sucks so badly. This is an ancient method of that involved putting someone sandwiched between two boats that are stacked on top of one another. From here, they'll feed the person and cover them in milk and honey and then just leave them. From here, the substances on and in the person will fester and attract bugs and other small vermin, which will then basically eat that person who can't fend for themselves alive. Not only would being eaten alive be one of the worst ways to go, but this process was incredibly lengthy and ensured the person suffered for a long time. Like, we're talking over 10 days here. In one of the first written mentions of scaphism, which comes from Plutarch, while talking about the of Mithridates, he said, quote, "When the man is manifestly dead, the uppermost boat being taken off, they find his flesh devoured, and swarms of such noisome creatures preying upon, and, as it were, growing to his inwards. In this way, Mithridates, after suffering for 17 days, at last expired." So yeah, anyway, if Plutarch wants to pay for my therapy after that, I think I'd be really grateful.
At number 9 is the Cleveland Torso Unaliver. Active between 1935 and 1938, this unidentified serial left a trail of grisly unalivings in their wake. Officially, they claimed about a dozen victims, but there could be way more. What makes this case even more unsettling is the gruesome way the unaliver operated. They beheaded and often dismembered their victims, and sometimes even severed torsos and appendages. Most of the male victims were castrated. The cause of the unaliving in many cases was the horrific dismembering itself, meaning that the people were alive as it was happening. Oh lord. The victims were often drifters, folks who lived on the fringes of society during the Great Depression. Their identities were hard to establish, which was a common theme for this enigma. Forensic science in the era was far from what it is today, making it even more challenging to identify the victims, especially since the heads were often missing. But here's the twist. The Cleveland Torso Unaliver had the audacity to taunt law enforcement. They sent postcards, and even placed remains where the authorities couldn't miss them right in front of Elliot Ness's office. Ness, who was famous for taking on Al Capone and led the Untouchables, couldn't crack this case. To this day, the identity of the Cleveland torso unaliver remains a haunting mystery.
In our 8th spot today, we have the orbs. This is a way to tell if your home is haunted. Orbs are said to be energy of life forms that have died. They are said to be the first stage or a sign of a ghost manifestation. The most common way to see them is through photographs. They are these white glowing balls of light, but some have appeared as different colors. Although it is quite rare, some have seen orbs with their naked eye as well. That's when you know for sure that it's not just dust you're seeing and it's actually a ghost. Moving on to number 7, we have the anti-eating mask. As someone who loves food, this invention would be my worst nightmare. Back in the 1980s, someone thought that this would be an easy way to help people diet or lose weight. Basically, it's a mask / cage thing that you strap onto your face. When you wear this mask, you're not able to eat, so it forces you not to. Also, it was opened and closed with a key, so someone could strap this mask onto your face and then take away the key. So you're literally forced to sit there and suffer without eating. Definitely not a healthy dieting solution at all. Instead, this just seems like some sick, twisted form of
In our number 6 spot today, we have the partition of India. Partition and independence is truly ideal, but when taking a look back at history, we can all see that it is not an easy road, and that was certainly the case with the partition of India, which took place in August of 1947. The partition of India was the division of British India into 2 independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The partition also involved the division of 2 provinces, Bengal and Punjab, based on the non-Muslim or Muslim majorities, the British Indian Army, the Royal Indian Navy, the Indian Civil Service, the railways, and the Central Treasury. Over 1 million people died overnight in the riots and fights for independence, and at this same time a train full of bodies was reaching Pakistan. It was absolute mayhem. Not only did millions of people die, but 10 to 20 million people were displaced following this. The partition of India was an event where the effects of which can still be seen and felt today. It would have been an absolutely frightening time for all of those who were living there.
At number 6 is the Freeway Phantom. The Freeway Phantom, a mysterious and deeply unsettling case, has baffled investigators for decades, which takes us on a chilling journey through the mysteries of American crime. This cold-blooded villain, harboring a seething rage against society, committed a series of heinous crimes that terrorized the Washington area. His motive is obscured in a shroud of darkness, which could be rooted in untreated psychological turmoil, perhaps depression, and definitely anger towards women. The Phantom's elusive persona, concealed behind a mask and a vehicle, suggests a methodical approach to his sinister deeds. His knowledge of the region's local stories hints at a connection to the area. The abduction and unaliving of his victims reveal a psychopathic disposition with deep-seated misogyny. The brutality of these crimes, coupled with a military-like precision, has led some to speculate about this person being a Vietnam veteran.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with styrofoam. Another super bad invention for us and the earth. Now, fun fact, the stuff that we think is styrofoam actually isn't. It's polystyrene. Styrofoam is light blue in color and is used in building insulation. And of course, it takes years to break down. Not only that, if you try to burn it, it will release at least 50 toxic chemicals into the air. It's just another huge polluter that's killing our planet.
In our number 4 spot today, we have molten metal. Okay, there's gotta be a point where I draw the line, right? I guess not, because you weirdos like to hear about these horribly insane punishments, and I'm here to deliver you what you want, so let's dive right into this whole batch of terrible. This absolutely skin-crawling punishment was a form of capital punishment because there is absolutely no way you'd be surviving after this. While gruesome, this punishment has a fairly simple explanation. Basically, they just poured molten metal or super hot liquid metal down the throat of the person being executed. I'll tell you what, that'll certainly do the trick. Usually during this punishment they would do things to ensure that your throat would be open during the pouring of the hot metal, and to that I have to ask, does it matter? That pain would be excruciating no matter what, but hey, people of the past loved a horrifying spectacle, so what am I to do?
In our 6th spot, we have the Tulip Staircase Ghost. The Queen's house in Greenwich has quite the reputation for being haunted. This house has been home to many female royals over the centuries, and now it's a tourist attraction for any curious individuals. Well, in 1966, a retired Canadian reverend and his wife decided to visit the Queen's house. While they were there, they took some photos of the place, including a photo of the famous Tulip Staircase. It was not until they developed the photos did they realize that there appears to be a ghostly image holding onto the handrails of the stairs. In fact, the man sent the photo and the negatives to Kodak, and they confirmed neither had been tampered with, so they believe he caught a real ghost on film. The question is, who is this figure? Over the years, a number of visitors have claimed to have seen other ghosts. In particular, a lot of people have seen the ghost of a maid who died after being thrown off the staircase. She fell 50 feet to the ground. People have seen her dressed in old-fashioned clothing, mopping up blood from the bottom of the stairs. Who's trying to go there and go ghost hunting with me? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be down.
Number 3. Jeanette De Palmer, New Jersey. In 1972, in Springfield, New Jersey, a dog brought a decomposing forearm to its owner. They quickly alerted the police, and this prompted a police search, and a body was soon found on a cliff. The body was identified as Jeanette De Palmer, a girl who was missing for 6 weeks. Now, the hill where she was discovered was covered with occult symbols, and many were led to believe that her body was placed on a makeshift altar. Many locals and even some police officers pointed their fingers at an alleged coven of witches who were rumored to have used Jeanette for a human sacrifice, and others said it was a satanic group. Now, reports from local papers mentioned the police couldn't determine the cause of death due to the body's decomposition, and authorities investigated a local homeless man who was a prime suspect, only to find no connection to the crime. Many believe that Jeanette may have provoked a group of Satan-worshipping teens at her high school, since she was involved with a group that helped addicts find their faith in Christ. Now, to this day, her death remains unsolved.
At number 2 is the Doodler. Alright, so let's dive into one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries in American history. Straight out of California, the Doodler. This unsettling serial unaliver terrorized San Francisco between 74 and 75, committing 6 to 16 unalivings and 3 assaults. What makes this case more chilling is how the Doodler earned his name. See, before brutally impaling his victims, he would sketch them. The victims were all men, and the suspect targeted them after meeting at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. The disturbing patterns of the victims being stabbed in similar locations adds another layer to the mystery. Despite police efforts, the Doodler was never caught.
1. Joseph Stalin. Need I say more? Need I really say more? Now, the world was just reeling from battling dollar store Charlie Chaplin for 5 years, who definitely was a man who needed to be stopped. But Stalin's forces did start out as an Axis power in World War II, but they eventually turned to our side and helped us out a great deal. But that doesn't, or shouldn't, diminish the fact that during his 30-year reign, he was responsible for the deaths of over 60 million people, 20 million of them being his own. That means he killed roughly 40,000 people per week during his reign. The closest we came to war with Stalin was the Cold War, a nuclear standoff between the US. His place on this list is a little controversial. After all, his dedication as a leader is one of the reasons Mustache Man bit the dust and World War II ended. But due to his murderous tendencies and paranoia, those in the grip of his iron fist would describe him as both a powerful leader, a genius, and a monster.